Clear the bridge.
Time! Time!
Interviewing John W. Close at his home in Overland Park, Kansas on May 27, 2003. Mr. Close was born on May 1, 1923, served in the U.S. Navy Submarine Service from November 12, 1942 to February 10, 1946. John, as a kid, where did you grow up?
In North St. Louis, and I was a skinny kid. I only weighed 142 pounds when I went in the Navy, and when I graduated from high school, I weighed 136 pounds.
You were...
I was not an athlete. Wanted to be. I had a buddy who was a great athlete, but it was a nice neighborhood, conservative neighborhood.
How about your family?
My mother died when I was 12. She had cancer and was bedridden the last 19 months she was alive. And my father, this was in 1936 she died. In 1940 my father remarried, and he died in 1945 while I was in service. I have two brothers, Charles and Robert. Charles was 13 and a half years older than I, and Robert was 11 years older than I. A little girl was stillborn between the 11 years between my brother and myself, and my mother wanted a little girl so bad. And maybe I shouldn't tell this on in this kind of a record, but I was supposed to be a girl. My name was going to be Elizabeth Ann, but I fouled them up, and it turned out to be a boy. But anyway,
so you're the sole survivor in your family, then?
I am.
Is that true? Yes. Your mom and dad and brothers
yes.
Are gone.
Yeah, my brother Charlie died in 1981, and my brother Robert died 2 years ago last November. He'd have been 91. He'd have been 90 the following year.
Mm-hmm. You were 18 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Right.
Did you have any thought then that maybe you'd be going in, or you wanted to go in?
Well,
what was your thinking then?
I was very active in the Order of Demolay, and all of the fellows that were in Demolay and in officers' line, I was an officer, and we were playing basketball in a gymnasium, and came out and heard that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, and foolishly said, "Oh, we'll beat those little no goods 3 months," which obviously wasn't true. But every one of us knew we were going to wind up in service. And, some were in the Coast Guard, some in the Army, a few, most of them really in the Navy, and 1 or 2 Marines. But it wasn't a case of if, it was a case of when. And my friend Ray Klein and I, who lived next door, Ray lived next door, we went down and enlisted in September of 1942, and our fathers would not sign us in. And there was no 18, 19-year-old draft law then, so we were stuck. And we went down and threatened to join the Merchant Marine, and our fathers signed us in the Navy. They were afraid to let us go with the Merchant Marine.
But they did let you go to the Navy.
Yes. And we went through boot camp up in Camp Green Bay in Great Lakes, and got out in January. And went home for 9 days, and then came back and went to the outgoing unit and was there for a week before Ray was sent to Anacostia for fire control school, and I went to Newport, Rhode Island for torpedo school.
John, do you remember the day you and your friend Ray left St. Louis to go to Great Lakes?
Yes.
What was your feeling, and what do you think the feeling of your dad was alive at that time?
Yes.
So what was your feeling of your family?
I'm sure he was very concerned. And it was an adventure to us. We were on the train, and we were having a big time. And we got to Camp Green Bay, and it was brand new. It had only been open 2 weeks. And the 4th week we were there, all the pipes froze, bringing about unusual situation. We had 150 men in one company on the lower deck and 150 more of them on the upper deck, and for 300 men to suddenly be without plumbing, and they get up in the middle of the night when it's about 5 above and go down to the next barracks in order to take care of nature's call. Why, we had a lot of fun, and we were disappointed because they told us we'd be home for Christmas when we left. They said, no, but you'll be home for New Year's Eve. We got home January the 11th, but we got into the way the service functioned in a hurry.
How was boot camp? Was that tough for you, or were you in pretty good shape? And that was just
we got tired of drilling. We had a man named Zach Holland who was our company commander, and he was from Mississippi. And we thought, well, we're going to have it easy because this guy's from Mississippi. He doesn't like the cold, and we got to get out there in the damn ice and snow to drill. Wrong. He was out there when nobody else was, but he was a good guy. And before we left, why he gave each of us an analysis in front of the whole company, and he told me, he said, Mr. Close, he said, what you want to do, you do well. But what you don't want to do, you skip all around trying to avoid it. And he really hit the nail on the head. But between DeMolay and the Navy,
you got a pretty good discipline.
If I am a man, they made it so.
Got it. Yeah, see, that's wonderful. So you left boot camp
and went to torpedo school in Newport, Rhode Island.
How was it decided that you'd be a submariner?
I volunteered. All this, at the time, I think everybody volunteered.
But it wasn't easy to get into.
Well, it was easy to start out, but it wasn't easy to stay. And I got to Newport to go to torpedo school. And the first day I walked in and they had this big schematic of a torpedo. And I thought, oh my God, I'll be gone in 3 weeks. But we were there for 16 weeks, and they broke it down in sections, and it became pretty clear. And a torpedo is a more intricate weapon than most people know. You can turn it 180 degrees either direction. You can control it from 5 to 50 feet in depth when it's fired, and it's very...
Do you feel like, did you really apply yourself in that school? I mean, you were serious about being a torpedo man.
Well, yes, I got there, and it became interesting. And it was a challenge, and I finished 7th in a class of 40 people.
So you were very proud of that, I'm sure.
Yes.
You found out you could compete.
One of those certificates you saw.
Yes, you could compete and compete well with your peer group.
Well, and your attitude changes, and you get more responsible and more confidence in yourself. Growing up, I was very introverted. When I was 11 years old, I fell and broke my first 2 teeth here. And they wouldn't do anything with them until I was 15. I went around for 4 years smiling.
Yeah.
But it brought out, it developed my personality a little bit and the fact that I could compete.
Mm-hmm.
And from Newport, we went to San Diego, which was like going from Alaska to Miami Beach. But I really enjoyed it out there. And then after advanced torpedo school, we went to submarine school in San Diego.
How long was sub school?
It was 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We had 3 weeks in class, making a bunch of drawings and schematics and understanding the compensation system and so forth. And then the other 3 weeks we went to sea in old S-boats. The S-boats were built about 1924, 1925. And I've had the opportunity to go on an atomic submarine a couple of years ago, and they are worlds apart. Back in the days of World War II, for a boat to go below 200 feet was, you were afraid the bulkheads would come in on you. And now they go down 1,600 feet, and it's just amazing. I would not be intellectually qualified to make a boat now. Of course, while they were selective at the time, they needed people at the time too. And World War II, everybody was mobilized one way or another.
But if for sub school, you probably got more psychological testing than many of the other services, didn't you? Because, I mean, you go underwater and stay there for some time, not everybody can handle it.
Well, of course, back in the days when I was in sub school and in submarine activity, why, you came up every night to charge the batteries. Nowadays, these guys can leave. They can't tell anybody where they're going. They can't tell anybody where they've been. They can be gone 3, 4, 6 months at a time, and very, very seldom ever surface. And that, I take my hat off to them. And they're a lot smarter. The equipment is so more sophisticated. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Blind Man's Bluff, but if you haven't, please do. It tells you pretty graphically, and this is from released confidential classified information of what went on between the Russians and ourselves in our atomic fleets and stuff. And it scares the pants off you.
What was the hardest part? Do you remember what was the hardest drill or routine that you had to do in sub school?
Well, of course, on the old S-boats, you have various, it wasn't all that hard, but they were very confining. They only had 4 torpedo tubes forward, and the bilges are underneath the tubes, and it became necessary from time to time to what they call dive the bilges. You get down there and you spend a lot of time in submarines, not while you're at sea, but chipping and scraping paint and then renewing it because of the salt water would eat into things. And I was in the bilges one time, and all I had on was a pair of swimming trunks. And you have to worm your way around and be sort of a contortionist to get in one side to do this. And when I finished painting and was working my way out, I had swollen up enough that I couldn't get out. So they brought a fan in, and I laid there while I cooled down and could get out. But there wasn't anything hard about it, or there wasn't any danger connected with it. It's just... and the other interesting thing, which wasn't dangerous, but you were below the surface. When a submarine's on the surface, the pressure hull and all is still below the surface. And while it was below the surface, why, and this was not on an S-boat, this was on a boat we were working on, why, you know these creepers that you get underneath a car, the mechanic, well, they had one of those that went in the torpedo tube. And the torpedo is 22 inches in diameter. And when you go in to wipe down the sides and put a coating in there, you make up your mind when you go in whether you're going to have your arms over your head or whether you're going to have them down here. Because you get in an area of 22 inches diameter, you don't have the room to move around. And you're on this thing, and there's a rope on it, and you got a guy working with you who can pull you out, and you don't argue with him the night before you do this. But you go in, wipe it down, and pull you out. But that was sort of an interesting thing. It wasn't hard. It just somebody had to do it. And,
but if you're claustrophobic, you couldn't do it.
Oh no.
Or you couldn't go in a sub.
That didn't bother me at all. Yeah.
So you finished advanced sub school, and then what did you do?
Well, you go into a pool, and they set it up to Vallejo, which is right outside of San Francisco. And we were up there for about 3 weeks. And there were more men in submarine service than they had submarines at the time. And they finally, the heavy cruiser Baltimore, which was a new type of cruiser, had just come back from its shakedown cruise. And there were about 40 of us being transported from there to Pearl Harbor. We weren't a ship's company or anything. In fact, they put up cots and we slept on the hangar deck because they had a plane that could take off and land from this heavy cruiser, seaplane, land in the ocean, and they hoist it back in. But it took us 5 days to get over to Pearl. And the last day out, they had a mock air raid on the cruiser. First, the gunners took practice shooting at sleeves being towed over by planes. Then they pulled this mock attack, and we're on the deck of the heavy cruiser, just watching everything, because we had no station to go to. And about the time you finally pick up the dive bombers coming down the stack at you, you got torpedo planes coming in from 4 different sides. And we sat there and agreed that we liked being in submarines because we wouldn't have to go through things like this. But that was very interesting. And then we got to Pearl, and most of us stayed in the relief crew until maybe a replacement was needed or a new boat came out. But usually when new boats came out, they already had their crews that helped in the final stages of the construction, and brought it through various shakedown cruises and trials to acquaint themselves with the equipment and procedures. But we worked a lot in floating dry docks and converting tanks from water tanks to fuel tanks, or vice versa. As more and more of the islands, the Gilberts and then the Marshalls were taken, and the bases were further advanced out into the Pacific, why you didn't need the long range anymore, but you wanted the water ballast tank so you could dive faster. And a submarine is an unusual weapon. And really, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, with the exception of a couple of carriers, destroyers, submarines, well, that was it. We didn't have any attack force to speak of. A couple of cruisers.
How many submarines do you know did we have at Pearl Harbor when it was struck?
Well, actually,
and were they?
There were several submarines in the sub base at Pearl Harbor at the time. And if you look at a map of Pearl Harbor, the island sits there. That's where Battleship Rhode was, and where they came down to launch their torpedoes that hit the battleships, you flew right over the sub base. And really, it was, as history will show, it was ironic that sure, it was important they sink the battleships. I'm not discounting that at all. But the thing that actually wound up beating the Japanese, the submarine, which sank over 52% of Japanese ships lost, they bypassed those without a thought. And they used the channel. The Navy Yard was here, the sub base was here, and the channel this way was going into the island where the Battleship Rhode was, where they sunk the Arizona, the Oklahoma, and the rest of them. And it was an experience. We would go down and we would tie up lines at night. We would release the lines in the morning. And in early, I think it was February of '44, why, there were more ships in that harbor. It was either February or March. More ships all over the Enterprise, the Essex, the Saratoga, and the Intrepid. They were all in Pearl Harbor, along with the cruisers and destroyers and stuff. We went down one morning to release the lines, and it was like the bomb had dropped, and everybody knew it but me. It was just swept clean. And then about a week later, or 2 weeks later, you read where they went into the Gilbert Islands and had the big flotilla there to back up the Marines when they landed. And then, of course, the same thing happened a month or so later when they went into the Marshalls, a couple of months later. But I've never seen so many ships.
So you were on reserve all the time that you were there, and you would
do whatever they told you to do.
Yeah. Refurb subs as they came in from a patrol.
Right. Half of the crew would go to the Royal Hawaiian for R&R, and the other half would stay there, and the relief crew would come aboard, and they would repair any damage that had been done. double check all the lines and the systems, and put in some new conning tower or whatever else might have been damaged. And then when the first half came back from R&R, the second half went, and the relief crew stayed there and worked with them.
Were you anxious to get on a sub and do a patrol?
Yeah, that's why you were there. But you know, you go so far with things. I volunteered to get into the Navy and enlisted, and I wasn't drafted. And I volunteered to get into submarines, and didn't make it till the third try. But once you're there and they tell you what you're going to do, you can you don't walk in and say, "Heck, Captain, I want a so and so." But it was a good experience, and working in the dry docks was interesting. And you found out where you should work, whether it's the upper reaches or the lower reaches of it. A submarine has what they call kingstons at the bottom that open up, and vents at the top. And what keeps a submarine afloat is the buoyancy that you have. But if you want to dive, you open the kingstons and the vents, and the water goes through, and you sink. It's controlled by bow planes and stern planes. And of course, conversely, if you want to go up, you close those things and pump air in and give you the buoyancy to go back up. But in chipping the plastic off the sides, if you're working at the bottom, everybody's crud comes down and hits you, and if you're working in your dungarees with your shirt open, it collects along your waistband, and that plastic melts with the heat, and when you go to take it off, it's like adhesive tape. So after a couple of days of that, I got smart and started working at the top and let my stuff fall on them instead of theirs falling on me.
So now, why were you chipping?
Well, you were changing from a water ballast tank into a fuel carrying tank for longer range. And then right before I came back to the States to go to Officers Candidate School, why we were doing the opposite, because we hadn't taken the other islands, and the range wasn't as required as being able to get down fast if you saw a plane or were being under attack. And when you're chipping off the pitch, then you don't want to work at the top. So I was in there one day, and the kingstons were open. They had fans coming in, but they forgot to open the vents. You got just so high in the tank, and the air wasn't circulating. But when you're in there, it builds up on you so slowly that you don't get any reaction from it until you come out. And we came out at noon to eat, and my eyes swole shut from the creosote that was in this pitch. So I went to sick bay and I got the afternoon off.
So how big were the tanks?
They're huge. There's in those drawings you see there's half a dozen major tanks. Some of them have nothing to do with the buoyancy. Some of them are auxiliary water tanks, and then you have air tanks. You have water systems to transfer weight from one end of the boat to the other. As you fire torpedoes, you lose about 2 tons every time one of them leaves, and you fire a spread of 3 or 4 torpedoes, well, you're losing a lot of weight, and you have to compensate, throw water into the system to level it off, or else the ship will broach and give away your position. But there was so much to learn. But now these young fellas, they're brilliant. They are really first class. I really admire them.
How long were you in Pearl Harbor then as a reserve torpedo man waiting to get on a ship for a patrol, which didn't happen?
Well, you worked on torpedoes while
you
were
worked
there.
on them,
Yeah.
yes.
There was, I think it was 92 preliminary adjustments and 57 final adjustments. And right before they're fired, of course, you crank in the direction you want it to go, and you can direct it 180 degrees to the left or 180 degrees to the right. You can also control the depth of it from 5 to 50 feet by a bellows type thing that you crank into. The same principle is used in the depth charge. You set those for the bellows and as it goes down and hits there's 44.4 pounds per square inch for 100 feet. Well, if you set the depth for 50 feet, you put in about 25 pounds of pressure on the bellows. When it got down to that part where it would release the firing pin, and that would explode the depth charge. And same thing was true with torpedoes, but you had a firing mechanism in there that once it left the tube, it tripped it, and you had a combination of water and alcohol and the spark, and that gave it time to crank up the charge, and fulminate of mercury into the black powder into the TNT.
So if a sub returned from a patrol had not fired the torpedoes, did you still have to do something to the torpedoes?
If they came back and had to fire the torpedo, they wouldn't come back. I think they'd be too ashamed. No, they didn't always fire all of them, but it was rare.
They stayed out until they shot at something.
As the war went on, and Japanese ships became scarcer because of the number of them had been sunk, and it got closer and closer to the home islands. Sometimes you came back with more fish than normal, but for the first year and a half or 2 years of the war, it was very rare that you came back with many fish. I'm speaking from other people's experience, not my own.
So how long were you there
I was
Pearl?
in Pearl from
then what happened?
October of 43 till April of 44. And how I was selected for Officers Candidate School, I really don't know, because there were 2 squadrons of us, and each squadron had about 8 boats, and then each of them had their own relief crews. But a yeoman, a second class named Unwin, and I were the only 2 picked to come back to Officers Candidate School from those 2 squadrons. And why me, I don't know. But I welcomed it at the time. I hadn't been home for 18 months, and kind of anxious to see the folks. I didn't know that I was going to stay there all the time, but as it worked out, I did. And the war ended in August of 1945, and they closed the unit in Warrensburg, Missouri in October of 45, and sent us up to Ames, Iowa, to Iowa State College for a short semester. During the war, universities were on trimesters. You had 3 periods per year. And of course now we're back to the semester thing, to where you have 2 periods. And they went from the 1st of November to the Christmas leave after the war was over, before they went back on the 2-term system. And they sent us up there, and in the meantime I got married. And that's a no-no in the V-12. You're automatically discharged, so I wanted to get out anyway. I'd been in for a while, and I was married, and war was over. So February the 10th, when I told them about it, they sent me out to San Francisco for 2 weeks, and said I was going to be put on a carrier to go over and bring the troops back on what they called the magic carpet. Sat there for 2 weeks, and I went from Ames, Iowa to San Francisco for 2 weeks before they sent me back to Green Bay to discharge me, which is sort of standard Navy.
Not knowing what was going to happen next.
But I really wouldn't have it any other way. I think the Navy really changed me. I went 142 when I went in, 168 when I came out, and there wasn't any fat at the time. And
so you were a new husband, and you got discharged from the service then. That was almost 60 years ago. What have you been doing the rest of your life? Well, the close family has been in the railway supply business since 1898. My father was 14 years old from a little town called Pacific, Missouri. Didn't go to high school. Boarded in St. Louis 5 nights a week, got a job at Shapley Hardware, and boarded 5 nights a week with a lady and her 2 brothers. And he was there for about 4 or 5 months, and little sis, as she was called, told the older brother, Arthur, who had a company making cleaning supplies for railroads,
that Charlie was a nice young man. He kept himself clean, paid his rent on time, and so forth. And you're 56 years old, Arthur. You know, you're not going to live forever. Why don't you hire Charlie to come in and do something? So he did. So my father started in 1898, and my brother Charlie worked there for 2.5 years, and Bob went with Dad in 1935, and Dad died in 1945, and I got out of service in 1946, and went to work with Bob in the family business, and have been there ever since. So we still have the company. And my son came with us in 1977 and is still active. So we have 105 years in the Close family in the railway supply business. So I knew I had a job. But actually I had planned on going back to Warrensburg, to Central Missouri State College, now a university, to summer school in 1946, and then 1 full year in summer school in 47, I would graduate. But when I was discharged on February the 10th of 46, my wife came up to Chicago, and we spent the weekend there. And I got out on the 10th of November, and our daughter was born the 20th of, I got out on the 10th of February, and our daughter was born November the 20th. If you want to count the 280 days, go ahead.
That's it, huh?
So when I knew I was going to be a father and had a job that I could go to, I figured I better go to work and earn some money. So I never finished college.
You stayed in the family business for all this period of time since you got out?
Yes.
And the family business is still running?
Yes, it isn't what it once was.
Under different ownership, or is the family still in charge of the business in St. Louis?
Well, we originally got into the manufacturing business. My father went to work for a man who manufactured cleaners, and he bought him out 10 years after he started. He was only 24 years old. Mr. Akwart was 66, which was a lot older then than it is now, and bought the business from Mr. Akwart by paying a royalty on so much a gallon. And that was done starting in 1908 until 1948, when the last of the family died. And then after World War II, things changed so drastically with the railroads, with passenger equipment and the way they did things, and they had diesels instead of steam locomotives and all the other changes. My brother Robert saw the handwriting on the wall that our cleaner wasn't going to fit into the future of the railroads, and we became manufacturers representatives in late 1947. Mm-hmm. Since that time, we've had a lot of different companies. And when the railroads started to merge, we were always in St. Louis before, and when the railroads started to merge, why, we survived that pretty well, even though the companies we represented had other representatives just like us in other locations. And whoever the domineering railroad was on the merger, usually that guy got the business. And unfortunately for us, during the mergers, though St. Louis had been the second largest railroad hub in the country, everybody that merged took another railroad out of St. Louis. So that's why in 1983, I moved to Kansas City. In 1984, we moved my son to Omaha. Because all the other railroads, there's no railroad headquarters in St. Louis anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's where I went to work.
So you were you came to Kansas City as a manufacturer's rep for
various
in the railroad industry, and your son went to Omaha.
Right. But what hurt us the most was when the companies we represented started combining with other companies, and they either just once the mergers happened, when people said, "Oh, you can cover the industry with fewer people because you got fewer places to go," but they overlooked the fact you still have to go out into the shops. But anyway, we survived the merger of the railroads themselves pretty well. But once the companies started merging, that really hurt us. And the railroads are a lot like the military in that they move very slowly. I mean, if they took everything new that came down the pike, it'd be chaotic. So at my age, and even at Jack's age at 49, you get a new company to represent, and the railroads want to test it for 1 or 2 years, you know. And when you get to be 80 years old, why, as some fellows joke, you don't even buy green bananas, you know.
So did you finally retire?
I don't think I ever will.
So you're still working?
Oh, yes.
Good.
I don't travel near as
yes.
Very seldom I do. But I'm still involved, and we have a few people. My other biggest problem, of course, is the people that I knew are gone. Mm-hmm. They've either taken buyouts, they're retired, or they're dead. And, of course, a lot of the railroads, when they merged, they downsized and released a lot of people. Then they outsourced to where other people make things that the railroad used to make. Mm-hmm. And that created a lot of consultants. And the short line railroads have flourished because the railroads in their union agreements couldn't keep paying the wages, so they sold off the property. And a guy might have stayed there and did the same job the next day, but he was making half the money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like anything else in the world, it changes. The only thing that doesn't change is everything changes.
You bet.
And life isn't fair. Get used to it.
Yes, right. I'm sure you've had more than one occasion in your 80 years to experience that.
Right.
Life is not fair.
Well, as an agent, you find that if you don't do a good enough job, they fire and get somebody else. You also find that if you do too good a job, they fire you and bring a company man in because it's cheaper for them to do that than pay you some of the percentages that you get. So you're on the edge all the time. Although we've had companies for over 50 years and others for 45, 40 years. Some big name companies. But when they get bought out by somebody else, you go with the flow.
Go with the flow. Well, I was going to say you've had a wonderful career, but you're having a wonderful career.
It isn't as wonderful as it once was.
Well.
But no, we've been very fortunate. God has been good, and I've had good health. And America, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and it's nice to go see things. But America is still the best place on earth. We have our faults, but
it's better than anything that's in second place, isn't it? By far. It's better than second place by far.
Right.
So tell me about your family, John.
Well, I have a daughter who is a nurse. She works with preemies at St. John's Mercy Hospital in St. Louis. She's 56 years old. My son is going to be 49 next month, and he's still working with me and is in the railway supply business.
Is he in Omaha or is he back in St.
Louis?
Omaha.
She is in St. Louis. My daughter has 3 children. A girl who is 36 years old, is a graduate of the journalism school at the University of Missouri and is in business for herself here in Shawnee. And her son, David, is working at a radio station down at Osage Beach. He's on the air announcer. And the third son is adopted and was a battered child that my daughter and her husband adopted. And they got him when he was 3 years old. He's now 30. No, he's now 28. And he's 6'4", terrific kid, great guy. My son has 2 daughters. One is 24, and be the good Lord willing, within the next couple of weeks, she's going to make me a great-grandfather.
Congratulations.
And the youngest grandchild is that's Angela's having the baby. Ashley is 18, and she's graduated from high school. She had cancer 3 years ago, and has done very well, and continues to be cancer-free now for over a year, and goes in for checkups periodically. But she's working and enjoying life. Looks great. So
that's wonderful. Life is good.
yeah.
Ups and downs, but life is good.
Well, my mother died when she was 50 of cancer, and my oldest niece, my brother's oldest girl, died of cancer when she was 50. So there's been cancer in our family, but we've had, like in the other family, we've had some good, some bad, some dysfunctional times, and, but we're still closely knit, and God's been good.
That's wonderful. John, do you have any kind of final thoughts about serving your country as a submariner during World War II?
I think one of the best things that could happen to this country is to have a compulsory time of service, maybe 2 years. Wouldn't necessarily have to be in the military, although I think that's a good idea. But if there's a certain handicap or something that would disqualify them from the military, they ought to have some kind of a job that serves the government. The discipline today is mythical in most parts, you know. We want the privilege, but we don't want the responsibility. And discipline is lacking, and if it feels good, do it. The consequences, the devil can take the hindmost. Although I think kids today are great, and they're smarter than we ever were. And maybe that's not all good, but they have things that happen, or they help them happen when they're not ready for it. And they get a lot of their information from the wrong sources. And discipline, and of course, my daughter, if she ever sees this, will shake her head, because I've preached privilege and discipline all my life. And the more privilege you have, or the more responsibility comes with it. And submarines, a perfect illustration of responsibility. And I would hazard a guess, not that I could ever prove it, but I think the reason the S-28 was lost off of Pearl Harbor during a training exercise is because somebody didn't do his job. You could have people with the greatest skills in the world there, but if you have one guy that opens the wrong valve or doesn't close the right valve during a dive, why, you're in deep doo-doo, and everybody goes with you. But I think you have to, the thing that I'm a very emotional person, and I guess I'm old-fashioned or something, but I believe in that good will triumph. And I guess I should have been born when there were knights or something like that, but because I really have a tendency to emulate certain people or look up to them. One of my local heroes is Stan Musial, although he's only 2 years older than I am. But at the time he was playing ball in St. Louis, and I happen to know Stan. In fact, I've got a mouse pad down there with a picture of he and I together. But I think you have to be honest with yourself. You can fool Lincoln. You can fool a lot of people for a lot of time, but the one guy you live with 24 hours a day is you. Mm-hmm. And if you don't like the guy you shave, you're in deep trouble.
Better change the guy.
Yeah.
That's what you better do. Well,
but I would hope that
good words.
Young men at the age of 17, I think one of the worst things we can do to young people, men or women, at 17 when they start college, or 18 when they start college, is get them to try and tell you what they want to do the rest of their life. Who the hell knows? And how many change those things over a course of time? Right. And that's why another reason why I think 2 years of military service or 2 years devoted to some form of government service would be good, because you're not going to be aged when you get out, It can do a lot for your discipline, a lot for your body development, and you learn responsibility, and you become a team member to where you're not the only fish in the sea.
And well, you certainly had to operate that way on a submarine, didn't you? Took everybody working together to get the job done.
Right.
One person failing to do it caused a problem. John, I think you've got a picture of yourself when you were a young guy.
Oh, yes.
So this is when you went in the first...
On my 70th birthday, my daughter
Bring it
dug
back
this out.
towards you a little bit. There you go.
Dug this out and put it on a calendar.
Handsome guy. I bet you can remember the day that was taken, can't you?
Yeah, I was on boot leave, and it was cold. We were in Forest Park.
Well, John, thank you very much for this interview. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a privilege, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I think it's a fantastic idea for all people, because personally I didn't know either one of my grandfathers. And I've amassed a book that you looked at earlier to try and acquaint my children, grandchildren, perhaps great-grandchildren, who the heck I was.
John, I hope that your great-great-great-great-grandchildren look at this tape in probably a different technological form and say, I'm glad this man was in my family. Thank you.
It was a privilege to serve the Navy, and I had a lot of fun, and I'm very proud of what was accomplished.